Hi, Econ 201 students. This is just a short video to remind you all of some important points that you'll maybe want to bear in mind as you work on Chapter 3 this week. Now, Chapter 3 is our whole model of supply and demand and the function of competitive markets. And we put a lot of miles on this in this class. So it's worth taking a few moments just to hit a few ideas again that of course are already visited in your PowerPoint slides and in your book. So once you've taken a look at Chapter 3, you'll be familiar with the basic setup here. So here we've got a simple supply and demand diagram, okay, our basic diagrammatic representation of how we model a competitive market. Okay. You can see we've got price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal. And one thing to bear in mind about this that can be confusing, especially if you've had some math before, is you should bear in mind that price is actually the independent variable in this model. And of course that's slightly unusual because typically you put the independent variable on the horizontal axis rather than the vertical. Okay. This model goes back for about 120 years to the late 19th century when Alfred Marshall, famous economist, was developing it. And at that time, the understanding was that quantity was the independent variable. Not so much. But economic theory is somewhat resistant to change in this way, you could say. And as a result, we still have this basic setup. And that said, by now you've seen we also have our supply and demand curves on here, right? Any curves show you a relationship. In this case, the relationship is between the price of a product and the quantity of it that consumers will demand and that companies will supply at all different possible price levels. All right? And of course, these curves, as we represent them, have an intersection between the negatively sloping demand curve and the positively sloping supply curve. We call that intersection the equilibrium point. Right? That's where equilibrium occurs, and it's special because at this special price only, quantity demanded and supplied, of course, are going to be the same. They're exactly equal. Demand is balanced with supply. Firms sell all their output. Consumers are all able to buy the product. Okay? It's very ideal. But the big action in this chapter mostly deals with changes to supply and demand. So again, you take a look in Chapter 3 or on your slides, you'll see there are sort of a number of factors that influence demand and supply other than price. Okay? Of course, price is already on the model here. So, for example, demand, the amount that consumers are willing to buy at different prices, it's influenced by a number of factors, as you kind of know from your own budget, right? So, consumer incomes, for example, play a significant role in how much consumers can afford to buy, and therefore how much they'll buy at different prices. Consumer preferences and tastes toward a product may change in the face of ad campaigns or new information about the product, like new health benefits associated with food or something like that. Likewise, supply, okay, the amount that businesses and corporations are willing to produce at different prices, that can shift as well, but for different reasons. So supply may shift if there's a change in the price of inputs, right? Those factors of production like labor, capital, natural materials, the elements that firms use to produce products. If they become more affordable, that improves firm profitability, gives firms an incentive to increase supply. Okay? And we're going to see that curve shifting to the left, the increasing direction on the horizontal axis down here. Okay? Likewise, if consumer incomes go up, demand will increase, the curve will shift to the left as you've seen. If consumer incomes go down, demand will decrease and shift to the right as you've seen in the book already. There's one or two points that have caused students to get hung up in the past that I want to draw your attention to after this kind of review. So one thing is that typically for the homework and exam setting problems you'll deal with in this class, usually you're only going to be shifting one curve at a time. If you're going to shift two curves, it will be specifically indicated in the problem, so you'll know, you need to shift more than one curve. And the reason we limit it to one curve at this 200 level type of class so it's very easy to overthink this type of problem because, as we've seen, there are several factors that influence both supply and demand, and it's easy to end up with curves that go on shifting and shifting perpetually and never stop. So, for example, let's suppose we have an increase in demand, right? Suppose we have an increase in consumer incomes, like we said. So let's imagine that tomorrow everyone in the United States gets a raise. Probably not going to happen, but let's suppose that does. Right? Well, an increase in incomes for most goods, normal goods, the increase in income will tend to increase demand, right? And we indicate that increase in demand by shifting the curve to the right, the increasing direction on the axis. Okay, so again, as you've seen, let's take that demand curve and we'll shift it to the right. Okay, so yeah, pretty good. And again, when you're drawing these for homeworks or exams, they don't need to be perfectly parallel curves. You just want them to be basically the same. Now, of course, now we have two demand curves, and you want to be able to differentiate them, right, to tell them apart. So typically, we make the first one D1, and the second one D2. And usually, we'll also add an arrow to indicate the dynamic change has taken place. Okay. Now, of course, that's going to produce a new equilibrium position, right, where the new demand curve intersects with the other supply curve. So let's go ahead and put that on here, as you've seen already, and as you'll discover in this week's quiz, okay, for practice. That new equilibrium point is going to occur where this new demand curve hits the original supply curve, okay, as you might kind of expect intuitively. So let's add that to the picture. Okay, there's our new equilibrium point, and that will come with a new equilibrium price. Okay? And we already have the original equilibrium price on here, and again, price is the independent variable. It's the one we're most concerned with. There's also an equilibrium quantity, right, down here, okay, corresponding to the quantity supplied and demanded at that equilibrium price. And you can add that. We typically don't need to bother, though, because again, price is the one we pay the most attention to. So, that said, we'll want to have a new equilibrium price to correspond with our new curve and equilibrium point. So let's just track that over just as you would with the original one. Alright, there we go. And the only thing we'll need to do now is to differentiate these two prices, and let's just do it to be consistent with our existing demand curves here. Okay, so we'll make that first equilibrium price, price 1, and the new one, price 2. Alright. Now, we brought this up just to say that we'll typically just be shifting one curve at a time. And the reason for that is, let's suppose we have this increase in demand here. Right? Well, it's very easy to then say, well, okay, this increased demand, okay, creates new profitable opportunities for the businesses, the supply side of this marketplace, and we'd expect supply in general to react to this increase in demand with an increase in supply. Right? More consumers want to buy whatever product this might be, so why wouldn't firms supply more of it, right? Take advantage of additional business they could be doing. All right, well, that would make sense, right? So we could have an increase in supply represented here as well. Then that increase in supply, okay, would tend to drive down the price of the product. Okay, let's picture that curve moving over here. Okay, lowering the price. When that happens, demand should increase again because of the change in relative prices. And now we've got a change in supply, two changes in demand. Supply will react to that new demand change. The problem is you can end up shifting these curves back and forth forever in this type of setting, unless you draw a specific line for how far you want the cause and effect series to go. So, in this class, we'll typically just be shifting one curve per problem. Keeps things nice and simple, and it, I think, lets you focus a little bit more on the key issue, which is when we have one of these changes in the market, like a change in consumer incomes or company productivity, what's the main impact going to be? Is that development going to influence demand primarily, or maybe supply? Okay. Knowing which side will be affected, and then will demand increase or decrease, or supply? Will it move to the right or left? Right? This lets you focus on those basic relationships rather than playing out basically treating the graph like a set of dominoes, with the curve shift back and forth into eternity there. So that's one important point that we'll want to mention. And again, in the quiz this week, and in your homework assignments that you'll be having, and also on the first exam, the midterm exam, which you'll have in a few weeks, the problems will tend to be of this character. Okay, we'll give you a basic marketplace, and we'll say this development happens, consumers have a wage cut, or productivity goes down, or whatever, and we'll want you to just show the basic impact on the market using these supply and demand curves. But we'll want to see the main impact. Okay, so you're going to shift one curve, so your thoughts should be what's going to be the main result of this change that we're seeing. Okay, what's going to be the principal result of it? What's the big first change going to be? And that's what you'll want to illustrate using this basic method here. And again, you'll have some practice on that this week. But because we use supply and demand so much, and because obviously it's so relevant to so much of microeconomics, it's something you'll want to practice and pay some attention to. Like I said, we do a lot with this. And the last thing I want to mention for the video is just to remind you, when you take a look at the discussion forum this week, you'll notice that we ask you to apply supply and demand analysis to a couple of different markets. So the market for gasoline, the market for financial services like getting a bank account or a loan. I think there's a food market on there as well, some market for some kind of food. We'll ask you to go ahead and use supply and demand analysis for all of those markets. Okay, so just treat them as different products. Consider what factors might be causing supply and demand to change in today's economy, and give us a discussion post about that and react to others. But one thing I do want to remind you of is that, of course, as I've mentioned and as your textbook author Krugman also says, supply and demand is designed to apply to a competitive market structure. Right? A competitive market. And again, what that means in economic theory is that we're looking at a market where there's no market power. There are no large firms, there are no big conglomerates or huge industrial corporations or giant financial institutions that have the ability to throw their weight around or manipulate the market or take advantage of smaller firms. Okay. Now, of course, those things occur because most real-world markets don't have this specific type of competitive market structure. Most markets have at least some large firms. Some markets only have large firms. Now, those are different types of market structures from pure competition, and we'll talk about exactly what those are when we get to Unit 3 on our theory of the firm, and talk about competitive market firms and monopolies and oligopoly, the sort of intermediate possibility. All right? So we'll ask you to suspend your disbelief there just a little bit. For your discussion post this week, treat all these markets as if they're competitive, but the question does ask you to sort of comment on it, okay? As you do each of these markets and consider how supply and demand are being shaped today, we would ask you to just say, is this market basically competitive? Should we expect it to act as the model predicts, which is based on a competitive market? All right? So give a response to each one and comment on what type of basic setup as far as market structure you think is relevant. All right? And we'll have some interaction on the discussion board there. And of course, you've got your quiz this week to practice your understanding of supply and demand. All right? And of course, I'm available through email and also on the discussion board if you have questions about this presentation. All right? Thanks.